If you've ever sat there wondering whether another conference ticket, another flight, another few days away from your desk is actually worth it, or if you should just stay home and keep writing, I want to tell you about the moment from this past weekend before I tell you anything else. I was sitting in a conference room in Auckland at the Romance Writers of New Zealand conference, and T.L. Swan was on stage talking about her self-publishing journey. And she said something that made me put my pen down and just listen. She talked about the 9 times she redid her covers and blurbs before Amazon finally started showing her books to the right readers. 9 times. Not one relaunch, not a quick tweak over a weekend. 9 separate attempts, spread out, each one a decision to look at what wasn't working and try again instead of walking away from it. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is the whole thing right here. This is the actual difference between a writer who has one good book sitting in a folder and a writer who has a career. I knew before she'd even finished the sentence that this was the episode I needed to come home and record for you. Welcome to the Right Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Williams, best-selling romance author, book coach, and founder of Serenade Publishing. I've been an avid reader ever since I could hold a book, and I've spent a decade immersed in the world of writing, editing, and publishing fiction. I know firsthand what it takes to turn a love of storytelling into a sustainable, soul-aligned author career. Each week, I share real talk about writing fiction, marketing smarter, and staying inspired, along with up-to-date industry insights and the strategies that are working right now. You'll also hear from fellow authors, editors, and industry experts who are out there doing the work and making waves. Here, we put the woo in the work of writing, publishing, and growing your author business. Think of this as your creative business pep talk, packed with heart, hustle, and a little bit of magic. So get cozy and join me. Your writing journey starts now. So here's where I've just come from. I presented a workshop at Romance Writers of New Zealand this past weekend called Building a Writing Career That Actually Sustains You. Not just one good book, a business. I chose that title on purpose because I think most of us get into this to write a book. The one book. The one that finally proves it, once and for all, that you weren't wrong to want this. And nobody sits you down early on and tells you that the book was never actually the finish line. The business is the thing that has to sustain you, book after book, year after year, long after the excitement of that first release has worn off. That's a different skill set than writing. It's not always the fun part. It's the part with spreadsheets and pricing decisions and ad budgets and covers you have to be willing to change even when you love them. But it's the part that decides whether you get to keep doing this in 5 years or whether you burn out on book 2, wondering why the thing that felt so joyful now feels like it's draining you dry. T.L. Swan opened the conference with the keynote, and she told the story that set the tone for everything that came after. Then I got up later and gave my workshop, and I think the room was more ready for it because of what she'd already said. She'd shown them the story, and I got to hand them the framework. She talked about redoing her covers, redoing her blurbs 9 times. Not because the book itself changed, because she kept testing, kept watching what readers responded to, kept treating every disappointing launch as a business decision to adjust instead of a creative wound to nurse. And on attempt 9, something shifted. Amazon's algorithm finally understood who the book was actually for and started putting it in front of the right readers. Sales moved. The story hadn't changed. The strategy around it had. She never gave up on it. That's the part I want you to sit with, because I think it's easy to hear she redid her covers 9 times and file it under a fun anecdote. It's not a fun anecdote. It's the entire model. If you've ever wondered whether you're actually talented or whether you just wanted this so badly you talked yourself into it, I want you to hear that story again. Because talent was never actually the variable T was testing. Persistence was. Willingness to adjust was. And that's available to you right now, today, in a way raw talent never has to be. I think that's the part that gets skipped in most of the advice floating around online. We here treat it like a business and picture spreadsheets and ad accounts, and sure, that's part of it. But what T actually showed that room was something closer to emotional discipline. The willingness to look at a launch that didn't work, not take it as proof you're not good enough and try again anyway. That's not a marketing skill. That's a decision you make about who you're going to be when something doesn't land the first time, or the third time, or even the 8th. I sat down with TL Swan a while back for a much longer conversation recorded live at the Sunshine Coast Fiction Festival, where she went even deeper into this, the grit of it, the growth, what it actually costs to go all in on a writing career instead of treating it as a hobby you're apologizing for. I'll drop the link below in the show notes. Go and check out that episode. That was the moment that stayed with me from this weekend. But sitting on the plane home, I realized it wasn't actually the first time a conference had handed me exactly what I needed to hear. Exactly when I needed to hear it. It's happened for 10 years now, and I wanted to walk you through why. Let's have some real talk here. 10 years ago, I started going to Romance Writers of Australia conferences. And if you'd asked me why at the time, I would have said it was for the workshops. That was partly true, but looking back now, with 10 years of distance, it was for something bigger than any single session on any single day. Here's what I mean by that, with 3 specific examples, because I don't want to just tell you conferences are valuable in the abstract. I want to show you exactly what they've built. Michael Hauge taught me his 6-stage plot structure years ago at one of those early RWA conferences. I still use it today. Every book. It's how I know where my turning points need to land before I've written a single scene. How I catch a sagging middle before it becomes 50,000 words of a problem. That's not a nice memory from a workshop I once attended. That's a tool I open, a document, and reference right now in 2026 on whatever I'm drafting. I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to look it up yourself. Melissa Storm taught me Amazon advertising, actual sit down and take notes, practical strategy. Back when I genuinely did not understand how any of it worked and was throwing money at ads and hoping. That one session changed how I've spent my ad budget for years afterward. It's the difference between guessing and having a plan you can actually explain to yourself. And Bella Andre. Bella wasn't teaching me a system so much as she was showing me a possibility. She was one of the original self-publishers, back when that path barely existed, and most of the industry still treated it as a lesser choice. Hearing her talk about building her own readership on her own terms, with ownership of her own rights, made something click that no spreadsheet could have taught me. If she could do that when the road didn't even exist yet, then maybe I could build my own version of it too, on my own timeline, instead of waiting for someone else's permission. Here's the thing about all 3 of those moments. None of them were actually the point of going. I didn't fly to a conference specifically for a plot structure or an ad strategy. I went because I decided 10 years ago that I was going to keep showing up year after year and see what happened. The lessons were the bonus that came from being in the room. And honestly, the friendships have mattered just as much as any workshop, maybe more. They're the ones who don't let me quietly shrink my ambition just because it would be more comfortable for everyone if I did. That's not networking in the transactional collect business cards sense. That's just what happens when you sit in the same rooms as the same people year after year and let them watch you grow and let yourself watch them grow too. There's no one right way to build that kind of support around yourself. There's a right way for you. But I can tell you honestly, mine didn't happen from a Facebook group at 11 at night. It happened from getting on a plane more than once and staying long enough for people to become more than names on a lanyard. Now, not every conference has felt easy for me. I want to be honest about that part too, because I think it matters more than the highlight reel does. In 2019, I went to the Romance Writers of America conference in New York. It's still, to this day, the biggest conference I have ever attended. Thousands of writers, publishers, agents, all in one hotel, all at once. And I am, by nature, an introvert. I don't come alive in a ballroom full of a few thousand strangers making small talk over name tags. That kind of environment can genuinely wear me out in a way that has nothing to do with how much I wanted to be there or how much I cared about the work. That week was overwhelming. I'm not going to dress it up as anything else for the sake of a tidy story. There were moments I went back to my hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and just breathed for a while before I could go back out and do it again. But here's what's true, and I've thought about this a lot in the years since. I have never once regretted going. Not the cost of the flights or the hotel, not the discomfort, not $1 or one overwhelming hour of it. I came home with more insight into how this industry actually works, more clarity about the kind of career I actually wanted to build for myself than I think I could have gotten any other way from any course or any book or any amount of scrolling. If you're someone who second guesses whether you're the conference type, whether you're too introverted or too new or too behind to belong in that room, I want you to hear this directly from me. You don't have to be the person who works the room. You don't have to love every minute of it or even most of it. You just have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable in exchange for what's on the other side of that discomfort. That trade has been worth it for me every single time, including the overwhelming ones, especially the overwhelming ones, honestly. What I actually walked away with from New York wasn't one big break either, if I'm being honest. It wasn't an agent who signed me on the spot or a deal that changed everything overnight. It was a clearer sense of scale. Sitting in sessions with authors doing this at a level I hadn't even known existed showed me what was actually possible, not as a fantasy, but as a real, buildable thing. Picture this. You come home from a weekend like that, sit down at your own desk, and instead of guessing at your next move, you can actually see 3 years out. You know which book comes next and why. You know what you're not doing anymore because you finally watched someone further down the road show you what to skip. That's what I came home with. Not a deal, not a big break, a 5-year plan I could actually explain to myself in one sentence without hedging. So that's 10 years. Auckland this past weekend, a decade of showing up to Romance Writers of Australia. The biggest and hardest one in New York back in 2019. Different rooms, different countries, different scale entirely, but the same pattern every single time. I show up, I stay a little uncomfortable, and I come home with something I couldn't have built alone at my desk, no matter how many hours I put in there. And here's what I've noticed. Looking back across all 10 years of it, the version of me who used to introduce herself as an author and then soften it with a joke. The version who wasn't sure if she was allowed to call this a career out loud. She's not who got on that plane to Auckland last week. Somewhere across 10 years of showing up, uncomfortable more than once, I became someone who says it plainly. I'm an author. I run a business. That shift didn't happen at my desk. It happened in rooms like these. Which brings me to the one I get to build myself for you. Every year I organise the Sunshine Coast Fiction Festival, and this year, on October 30, we're devoting one full day exclusively to writers and published authors. Not readers, not the general festival crowd wandering through, just us, just the people actually doing the work. We've got Becca Syme joining us, whose work on author mindset and productivity has helped so many writers stop treating burnout as a personal failing and start treating their creative energy as something worth protecting. Craig Martell, who's built a wide catalogue and a real sustainable business around it and can tell you exactly how. Ingram Spark, walking through the distribution side that so many of us avoid learning until we're forced to. The part that decides whether your books can actually reach readers beyond one platform. Mads Rafferty and Catherine Bilson and more names alongside them, each bringing something specific, not general advice you could find in any blog post at midnight. This isn't a day of inspiration for inspiration's sake. Every session is built to hand you something you walk out with, a plan you didn't have that morning, a decision you can finally explain to yourself instead of justifying. People who are going to hand you the kind of thing Michael Hauge handed me, or Melissa Storm, or Bella Andre. A tool you'll still be using in 10 years. A story that makes something click. Maybe both, if you're lucky, the way I was this past weekend. So here's exactly what I want you to do. If October 30 is a day you can be in the room, register for the Sunshine Coast Fiction Festival Writers Conference now, before you close this episode and forget. One day, one ticket, and you walk out with the same thing I walked out of Auckland with. A tool you'll use for the next 10 years, or a story that makes something click, or both. And if that date genuinely doesn't work, and I know for some of you it won't, register anyway and choose the recording. You'll get the same sessions, the same speakers on your own schedule. No discomfort of a ballroom required. There is no version of this where the timing excuses you from getting what's in that room. All the details, the full lineup and registration are at serenadepublishing.com/SCFF/conference. I'll drop that link in the show notes as well, so you don't have to remember it while you're driving or out for a walk. That's it for this episode. 10 years of conferences, one workshop I just gave in Auckland, and one I can't wait to host myself on October 30. We take it one step at a time. This might be your next one. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again next week on the Right Podcast. Thanks so much for listening to the Right Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world if you'd leave a review and share the show with your writer friends. It helps more creatives find their way to us. And don't forget to follow Serenade Publishing on Instagram and TikTok for more writing tips, publishing advice, and exciting events to keep you inspired. Keep writing, keep dreaming, and know that I'm here to support you every word of the way.